Eh? I think someone is coming out. Who is this? He's actually in this pagoda. He seems to be dressed like someone from the Epic Alliance. Could someone from the Epic Alliance have come to reinforce us? Some controllers were the ones discussing. These controllers looked a little miserable. They had provoked an unknown kind of strange lifeforms and were actually surrounded and attacked. Those mutated lifeforms were all hideous and terrifying behemoths. Every one of them was comparable to an ordinary controller. The powerful ones were even comparable to one-star supremacies. Moreover, there were a lot of them. There were not around 10 but dozens or hundreds of them. Gore! When these mutated beasts saw Lin Feng, all of them glared menacingly and growled as they slowly approached Lin Feng. However, Lin Feng did not move at all. He did not even look at these mutated beasts. Humph! However, it was impossible for Supremacy Epic to sit back and do nothing. He also flew out of the Supreme Pagoda. With a cold snort, immediately, an invisible force enveloped these mutant lifeforms. Crunch! They appeared to be sliced apart. Dozens or hundreds of mutated beasts were completely sliced into pieces without even letting out screams. The aura of death filled the void. They're dead. Many people looked at each other. Those terrifying beasts that had forced them into a hopeless situation just now were really all dead. At this moment, they heard the voice of Supremacy Epic. Leave this place. Do not enter within a radius of 1 billion miles, or you will be killed without mercy. Supremacy Epic had experienced 8 epical cataclysms, and was used to life or death situations. Normally, he looked very amiable and approachable, but when he was serious, no one wouldn't fear his terrifying might. Hence, these controllers all bowed to Supremacy Epic from afar and quickly left, not daring to enter an area of 1 billion miles again. After these controllers left, Supremacy Epic casually grabbed a mass of flesh in the void. This mass of flesh was left behind after cutting up those mutated beasts. Supremacy Epic sensed for a moment, then frowned. These are not life forms of the small kiliocosm, but life forms from another world. The life forms from another world have already invaded the hinterland of the small kiliocosm. Are they in so deep? Supremacy Epic's heart sank slightly. This meant that the current situation in the small kiliocosm was probably really not optimistic. Also, the entire kiliocosm domain corridor seems to be filled with an aura of devastation. This aura is all too familiar. The epical cataclysm will probably arrive soon. Supremacy Epic had experienced the epical cataclysm 8 times. How could he not be familiar with the situation during an epical cataclysm? Every time before the epical cataclysm, there would be this aura of devastation. He had already sensed it 8 times, and this was the 9th and last time. In fact, the aura of devastation this time was much richer than ever. This was the ultimate epical cataclysm. Everything would be reduced to ashes. Supremacy Epic was silent, guarding Lin Feng quietly. Perhaps currently, Lin Feng was the only hope. However, that hope was too slim. Even Supremacy Epic was not confident. After Lin Feng stepped out of the Supreme Pagoda, he stood quietly in the void. He did not express anything about Supremacy Epic's actions, and did not even take a look. Right now, he seemed to be uninterested in everything. The only thing he was interested in was the aura of destruction in the depths of the small kiliocosm, which was 1,000 or 10,000 times stronger than the origin of destruction in his body. In fact, due to that terrifying mass of origin of destruction, the origin of destruction in his internal kiliocosm was also destroying his internal kiliocosm domain wildly. However, it was not destroying worlds or kiliocosm domains, but rules. Lin Feng's internal kiliocosm domain also had its rules of operation. Everything was orderly. That mass of origin of destruction destroyed the rules of Lin Feng's internal kiliocosm domain, destroying order, causing the entire internal kiliocosm to become incomparably chaotic, as if it was on the verge of collapse. Waves of destructive aura naturally filled Lin Feng's internal kiliocosm domain. Moreover, they quickly strengthened the origin of destruction, making it even stronger. After destruction comes rebirth. I didn't find the epical cataclysm, but I found the origin of destruction. Come, come. All the origin of destruction will enter my body. Everything will be destroyed. Only in destruction can there come rebirth, and can the small kiliocosm evolve. Lin Feng's eyes became brighter and brighter. His emotions were also rising, as if something had sublimated. He did not deliberately devour boundary stones, nor did he deliberately devour world origin. Everything came naturally. When Lin Feng returned to the small kiliocosm, he already understood his path, or rather, the direction he would advance Indiana. Evolution. Only by evolving a small kiliocosm could he advance, improve, and become a great kiliocosm sovereign. The evolution of a small kiliocosm could actually begin from the moment he became a 2-star supremacy. Evolution was a long process, and could not be accomplished overnight. Hence, after leaving the Supreme Pagoda and returning to the small kiliocosm, Lin Feng had already made his decision. Evolve! Lin Feng's expression was solemn as he looked at the void. In the depths of the small kiliocosm, there was a huge mass of origin of destruction. It seemed able to destroy everything. It was the origin of destruction of the entire small kiliocosm. If Lin Feng wanted to evolve the small kiliocosm, he had to acquire rebirth via destruction. Destruction had to be natural. If Lin Feng forced his internal worlds to collapse with a thought, it would not be destruction. If he wanted the small kiliocosm to evolve, order and rules had to be destroyed. The best way to destroy quickly was the origin of destruction. Lin Feng was lucky enough to obtain a mass of origin of destruction from the celestial devil ancestor. He had always been thinking about the path to becoming a kiliocosm sovereign. Now he already knew. His path was to evolve a small kiliocosm by using the origin of destruction to begin destruction in the internal kiliocosm domain, and pushing for the evolution of the internal kiliocosm domain. Come, come. Destroy! Lin Feng's voice grew louder and louder. He opened his arms and stared intently at the void. Boom! In the next moment, it was as if the entire small kiliocosm was shaking, or a bolt from the blue. All entities above the level of 1-star supremacy could sense the abnormality in the small kiliocosm. It was just like when the 3 small kiliocosms collided back then. What's going on? Has another small kiliocosm collided? I don't think so. There are only 3 small kiliocosms. But why is there such a huge commotion? Could a 3-star supremacy have descended? Many 2-star and peak 2-star entities felt a sense of oppression, as if they were suffocating. Just sensing a little aura made their hearts palpitate. However, at this moment, only Supremacy Epic knew what was going on. The origin of destruction. Supremacy Epic's eyes widened, as if he had seen something unbelievable. His expression was filled with shock. The origin of destruction. That was the origin of destruction. The number of people who knew about the origin of destruction in the entire small kiliocosm could be counted on one hand, and Supremacy Epic was one of them. He had entangled and fought with the celestial devil ancestor for so many epochs. How could he not know the background of the celestial devil ancestor? The celestial devil ancestor was originally a mass of origin of destruction, and was destined to be born. It was not wrong to say that the celestial devil ancestor was born according to the greater scheme of the small kiliocosm. The celestial devil ancestor was born with destruction. Or rather, his mission was destruction. The origin of destruction was the foundation of the celestial devil ancestor, and represented the destruction of everything. In fact, to a certain extent, the epical cataclysm was also related to destruction. However, even the celestial devil ancestor that Supremacy Epic knew about probably did not have such a terrifying origin of destruction. It poured down majestically from somewhere in the void and pounced straight towards Lin Feng. The origin of destruction. How can the origin of destruction be here? It's actually much more terrifying than the celestial devil ancestor. Supremacy Epic took a deep breath. Even he had to retreat far away. The origin of destruction poured down. Anything that came into contact with it would be destroyed. Be it controllers, celestial devils, or even treasures, as long as they came into contact with a trace of the origin of destruction, they would be destroyed. This amount of origin of destruction was far more terrifying than the foundation of the celestial devil ancestor. This was the origin of destruction that belonged to the small kiliocosm. Could it be that metamorphosing into a 3-star supremacy requires the origin of destruction? Supremacy Epic did not know. He had a nagging feeling that something was amiss. He had also experienced several epical cataclysms, and had even interacted with 3-star supremacies of the medium kiliocosm before. The other 3-star supremacies had never tried to draw down the origin of destruction like Lin Feng. Once the origin of destruction was drawn, it would undoubtedly be suicide. Even a 3-star supremacy would not be able to withstand the corrosion of the origin of destruction, and would face destruction. But now, the origin of destruction had already poured down, and instantly enveloped Lin Feng's body. Even if Supremacy Epic wanted to remind him, it was already too late. Boom! The origin of destruction poured down and instantly enveloped Lin Feng. However, most of the origin of destruction was directly devoured by Lin Feng into his internal kiliocosm domain. Lin Feng did not know the questions in Supremacy Epic's heart, but even if he did, he would not change his actions. Supremacy Epic's feeling was right. Lin Feng was not just metamorphosing into a 3-star supremacy. In fact, Lin Feng's current actions had nothing to do with the realm of 3-star at all. He was not working hard to become a 3-star supremacy, but clearly evolving a small kiliocosm. Destroy. After destruction comes rebirth, which would be evolution. Lin Feng muttered softly. His internal kiliocosm domain shook wildly. Be it worlds or kiliocosm domains, be it rules or anything else, they were all completely powerless to resist this vast origin of destruction. Destruction. Destruction of everything. Only the chaotic lotus seemed to be frantically trying to stabilize the internal kiliocosm domain. Its roots stretched into the kiliocosm domain wildly, controlling everything in the kiliocosm domain firmly. Unfortunately, facing the origin of destruction, even the chaotic lotus could only barely hold out. Moreover, the chaotic lotus could hold out due to the world origin, a large astronomical amount of world origin. All this world origin was all obtained from devouring the celestial devil ancestor Devour. Lin Feng had never even counted how much world origin the celestial devil ancestor's true form was converted into. He only knew that there was a great amount of world origin, far more than just a few quadrillion portions. A large amount of world origin supported the chaotic lotus and the entire internal kiliocosm domain. The origin of destruction was constantly wreaking destruction, while the world origin was working hard to repair the damage to the internal kiliocosm domain. However, the origin of destruction was too strong, and there was too much of it. Soon, Lin Feng's internal kiliocosm domain was on the brink of giving out. Lin Feng, on the other hand, did not seem to have moved at all. He was completely immersed in the devastation of the origin of destruction. He was trying his best to find rebirth amidst the destruction. If there was only destruction and no rebirth, it would undoubtedly be a failure. Once it failed, Lin Feng would fall. There would be no way to luck out. Even the space-time imprint could not save Lin Feng. This was because it was the internal kiliocosm domain that was destroyed. One world after another was destroyed. Lin Feng's consciousness was immersed in the internal kiliocosm domain. Lin Feng only protected a world in the center, the chaotic world, with all his heart. Even in the great tide of destruction, the chaotic world was safe and sound. This was because his family, his friends, and everything he had sworn to protect with his life were there. Chu Chun. Lin Feng heaved a long sigh. He felt very guilty towards his wife. He had not forgotten his wife, his son, his daughter, as well as his parents. They were all in the chaotic world. Among all the worlds, only the chaotic world was special. Their lifespans were eternal and infinite. Even if they did not cultivate, Lin Feng could make them immortal. However, ever since he became a controller, he rarely returned to the chaotic world. He had never even paid attention to his wife or family. The epical cataclysm suffocated him. The pressure of cultivation also made him neglect his connection with his family, and his concern for his family. But now, as the origin of destruction continued to wreak havoc, Lin Feng did not seem to have any hope of finding rebirth. He went further and further in the destruction. The path of evolution was long. Lin Feng was definitely not the only one who had transformed into a universe. Although they were very rare, there might also be controllers similar to Lin Feng in other small kiliocosms. Unfortunately, while they all had great potential, in the end, it was just potential. Some fell before they could completely grow, while others were unable to survive the major hurdle of evolving the small kiliocosm even if they grew. One would either succeed in evolving a small kiliocosm or die trying. There were no flukes or accidents at all. The collapse of worlds, the collapse of kiliocosm domains, the shattering of rules, and the descension of order into chaos. Lin Feng's internal kiliocosm domain could not hold out anymore. The chaotic lotus was growing a large number of boundary stones into worlds in a frenzy, but it was useless. The worlds born were far less than the worlds destroyed. Hence, Lin Feng's internal kiliocosm domain had already begun to collapse. Moreover, the origin of destruction seemed to be becoming stronger and stronger. Most of it was from the destructive power formed by the collapse of Lin Feng's internal kiliocosm domain. The majestic power was ready to sweep through the entire internal kiliocosm domain and destroy everything. Where is the rebirth? I still can't find it in the end. Lin Feng heaved a long sigh. He had let go. He had only seen destruction and never seen rebirth. Boom! The great tide of destruction swept through Lin Feng's internal kiliocosm domain majestically. Even Lin Feng's consciousness was dispersed at once, as if he had fallen into infinite darkness and was constantly sinking. He failed. Supremacy Epic stared into the void. As the origin of destruction landed, Lin Feng's aura became weaker and weaker. In the end, it was already as weak as a tiny flame, ready to be extinguished at any moment. And now, in Supremacy Epic senses, the last trace of Lin Feng's aura disappeared completely. The aura of a person was illusory, but it was closely related to life. This was especially the case for controllers. Even a 3-star supremacy could not converge their life force. If a person's life force disappeared completely, there was only one possibility: death. Supremacy Epic could not believe it. His mental power frantically sensed the center of destruction, but he did not find anything. Lin Feng's aura had completely disappeared, leaving only the violent aura of destruction. Supremacy Epic was very disappointed. He was an ancient supremacy born in the first epic, the leader of the Epic Alliance, and could even suppress the celestial devil ancestor. He had seen too many geniuses fall, but he had never felt such pain as he did now. He even felt a sense of emptiness, and a huge sense of loss filled the depths of his heart. There was only one reason. Lin Feng was their only hope. It was not the hope of becoming a 3-star supremacy, but the hope of surviving the epical cataclysm. But now the hope had been extinguished. Time passed slowly, but there was no movement from Supremacy Epic at all. Huh? Why hasn't the origin of destruction disappeared yet? Suddenly, the Supremacy Epic discovered something. Lin Feng was already dead. Even the aura of his life had disappeared, leaving only the violent origin of destruction, which no one could approach. Logically speaking, the origin of destruction should have long disappeared at this moment. But now, not only did the origin of destruction not seem to be disappearing at all, in fact, it was becoming more and more intense and terrifying. Could it be that? A bold idea flashed through Supremacy Epic's mind, but he could not quite believe it. However, that massive origin of destruction still seemed to be churning violently like boiling water. Vaguely, a special aura mixed amidst the aura of destruction rose slowly. Endless darkness and endless oblivion. Lin Feng's consciousness was already completely blurry. He could not even sense everything around him, nor everything in his internal kiliocosm domain. Even his connection with the chaotic lotus had been completely severed. Is this what death feels like? A thought flashed through Lin Feng's mind. Death had never been so close to Lin Feng as it was now. Every time he was on the verge of death, he actually had something to rely on, and would not truly die. But now Lin Feng was truly dead. He had already sensed the aura of death. Once his internal kiliocosm domain collapsed, Even the spacetime imprint could not save him. My internal kiliocosm domain has completely collapsed by now, right? All those years of diligent cultivation have been for naught. Who would have thought that everything would be for naught in the end? Lin Feng seemed to be smiling weakly. Perhaps he could not even speak now, and only thoughts were spinning in his mind. Or rather, this was his purest consciousness, his true self, in the depths of his soul. I wonder if there will still be any world origin after the internal kiliocosm domain collapses? Or what will happen to those boundary stones? In many years, will my collapsed internal kiliocosm domain also form an area similar to the ancient battlefield? Perhaps some worlds will be destined to be born. At this moment, Lin Feng let go of everything. He seemed to have no desires now. When people faced death, there would eventually be a moment when they would attain supreme enlightenment. Even Lin Feng was no exception. He was even in the mood to think about what would happen after his death. Swoosh! A thought flashed through Lin Feng's consciousness like a bolt of lightning. Would some worlds be destined to be born from the collapsed kiliocosm domain? Lin Feng recalled carefully, trying to grasp something. This statement made Lin Feng feel something very important to him. He wanted to grasp it, but could not no matter how hard he tried. He was almost dead now, truly dead. If he could not find rebirth under the origin of destruction, he would die. After his death, everything in the world would no longer have anything to do with him. Even if the world stopped being destroyed, and the epical cataclysm did not descend, it would no longer have anything to do with him. Worlds destined to be born. Finally, an idea flashed through Lin Feng's mind. He had grasped something. Rebirth. So this is rebirth. Lin Feng was overjoyed. An ecstasy surged from the depths of his heart. Destruction and rebirth. He had always been seeking rebirth amidst destruction. Or did the growth of worlds from the chaotic lotus represent rebirth? But from the looks of it now, he was wrong. Wrong. He was wrong about everything. This was because destruction was rebirth. They were completely two sides of the same coin. Since the moment of destruction, it actually represented rebirth. Even if Lin Feng fell completely, as long as the small kiliocosm was still around, in millions of years worlds would definitely be born. Even if the small kiliocosm was destroyed by the epical cataclysm, new small kiliocosms would definitely be born countless years later. This was the workings of order in itself. Destruction and rebirth had always been two sides of the same coin. The so-called metamorphosis and so-called evolution were actually repeated expansion amidst destruction to enhance the internal kiliocosm domain. Only then could he truly evolve a small kiliocosm. As for Lin Feng, he had already taken the wrong path at the very beginning of the evolution. He had lost his conviction and hope, so how could he metamorphose successfully? Ha ha ha, so this is rebirth. This is what I've always been pursuing. Lin Feng could not help but want to laugh aloud. However, he had understood far too late. He only had a little consciousness left now. He could not do anything. How could he undergo metamorphosis? If it were another controller who had transformed into a universe, it would be useless even if they comprehended it now. In reality, Lin Feng was not the only one. Other controllers who transformed into a universe would also attain an epiphany the moment they were on the verge of death. This was what it meant to attain enlightenment and die in the next moment. Many true controllers who had transformed into a universe and had infinite potential died and lost their cultivation when evolving the small kiliocosm. They only attained a vague epiphany when on the verge of death and about to disappear. But it was already too late. Even a kiliocosm sovereign could not do anything at this point. However, Lin Feng was different. Although he had also transformed into a universe, and was only a two-star supremacy far inferior to a kiliocosm sovereign, he had something that far exceeded kiliocosm sovereigns, and that was the rules of time. Time was the most mysterious type of rules among all the rules. Even the supreme rules of space were slightly inferior compared to the rules of time. The reason was very simple. It was precisely because the rules of time had the power to change everything in the world. Now, Lin Feng wanted to use the rules of time to change the course of his death. Or rather, only the rules of time could change Lin Feng's situation. This was the only chance. Come, success or failure depends on this. Since I've already understood destruction and rebirth, and the key to becoming a Kiliacosm sovereign, no one can stop me. Lin Feng's consciousness was roaring. Time reversal. Lin Feng roared. In his consciousness, this was just a silent shout. However, as he mobilized all his consciousness and desperately mobilized the invisible power of time, everything seemed to have changed. In the dark, the mighty power named time quietly began to change everything. It was like a shout that came from the soul. The originally collapsed internal Kiliacosm domain actually seemed to have gone still at this moment, but it only went still for an instant. Soon, the tumultuous internal Kiliacosm domain continued to collapse. However, this collapse was not the collapse of the order or the rules. It was purely the collapse of his internal world, which seemed to be unable to withstand the huge burden and was collapsing in a frenzy. The burden was heavy. Many worlds and Kiliacosm domains exploded with a bang at this moment and completely disappeared. The entire small Kiliacosm seemed to have become even more chaotic. However, at the same time, a powerful force slowly rose. Time. This was the power of time. How massive was Lin Feng's internal Kiliacosm domain? There were a total of 7 trillion worlds. How could it be easy to reverse time in such a huge Kiliacosm domain? Even under normal circumstances, Lin Feng would have to pay a heavy price, let alone now. With a thought from Lin Feng, even with just a little consciousness, time was reversed at this moment. His internal Kiliacosm domain collapsed with a bang, almost reduced to dust. However, Lin Feng did not seem to care at all. The entire internal Kiliacosm domain was reversing. Perhaps the world had just collapsed, but as time reversed in the internal Kiliacosm domain, this world appeared again. Time had the power to change everything in the universe. If it was powerful to a certain extent, it could even reverse everything. Everything was in its control. Perhaps this was the realm of the wayfarer of spacetime, Dawn. However, this thought only flashed through his mind for a moment. Lin Feng knew very well how terrible his current situation was. He had only reversed time by a little, perhaps a second, perhaps 10 seconds. However, it did not matter. It did not matter if his internal Kiliacosm domain collapsed at the next moment. Obtaining rebirth from destruction was the key to evolving a small Kiliacosm. Once Lin Feng reversed time, his consciousness completely returned, and he would not continue to sink. Perhaps in a thousandth of an instant, Lin Feng's consciousness had completely returned. He could sense the changes in his internal Kiliacosm domain, the changes in every world, every Kiliacosm domain, and even every life form. The emotions of those life forms on the verge of death constantly attacked Lin Feng's mind. However, Lin Feng's heart was already calm. He only carefully comprehended rebirth in destruction. At the time of destruction, there was already rebirth. At this point, Lin Feng should not stop the destruction. On the contrary, he should even propel the destruction, as long as he could protect the chaotic world. As for whether the other worlds could survive the tide of destruction, it would depend on their luck. The epical cataclysm. This is the cause of the epical cataclysm. Lin Feng already understood. He understood completely. The epical cataclysm was not caused by human power, but natural. When the small Kiliacosm needed to expand, it had to undergo a cataclysm. Many cultivators used the small Kiliacosm as fuel for cultivation and obtained everything they needed from the small Kiliacosm, such as resources, comprehension of rules, and so on. However, at the same time, didn't the small Kiliacosm also treat cultivators as fuel? The more cultivators there were, the more violent the epical cataclysm that erupted in the small Kiliacosm would be. At that time, everything would be destroyed, and everything would return to calm. However, a small Kiliacosm could obtain the fuel to undergo metamorphosis itself from the great number of cultivators who were destroyed during the epical cataclysm. Hence, the small Kiliacosm would metamorphose step by step during the epical cataclysms, and one day metamorphose into a medium Kiliacosm. This was only Lin Feng's hypothesis, but Lin Feng had already comprehended the true nature of the Kiliacosm sovereign. Hence, his hypothesis was basically not far off. Small kiliocosms also needed to undergo metamorphosis, and the epical cataclysm was not the end of everything. On the contrary, it was the beginning of everything. Of course, it was very, very difficult for a small kiliocosm to completely undergo metamorphosis. It was even countless times more difficult than it was for a cultivator to try to become a kiliocosm sovereign. However, this was the fundamental way of operation of the small kiliocosm. Who would have thought that the small kiliocosm would also use cultivators as fuel? That it would treat all life forms and everything as fuel? Lin Feng's mind was incomparably clear. There was nothing that could be concealed from him now. He even understood that if he wanted to become a kiliocosm sovereign, he had to experience a destruction, which was actually the epical cataclysm. Only by experiencing the epical cataclysm in the internal kiliocosm domain once and surviving it could one evolve the internal kiliocosm into a small kiliocosm. However, the epical cataclysm also needed to brew and required time. In Lin Feng's current internal kiliocosm domain, this kind of destruction was far from the epical cataclysm. There were only signs of the epical cataclysm, and it had yet to completely begin. Once it began, it would probably be difficult for Lin Feng to survive in his current state. In cultivation, one could not necessarily succeed just because they attained comprehension. On the contrary, the realm of comprehension was just one factor. They also needed resources. Even small kiliocosms needed resources if they wanted to undergo metamorphosis. How could cultivators not need resources if they wanted to undergo metamorphosis? Lin Feng knew very well that every controller who transformed into a universe had to survive the epical cataclysm in the internal kiliocosm domain if they wanted to evolve a small kiliocosm. That kind of epical cataclysm could destroy everything. They had to undergo metamorphosis during the cataclysm, and this required a large amount of resources. To the kiliocosm sovereigns who wanted to survive the epical cataclysm, world origin and boundary stones were not of much use. There was only one treasure that could really help the kiliocosm sovereigns survive the epical cataclysm, and that was the small kiliocosm origin. Lin Feng's gaze was sharp. He looked at the void above his head, as if his gaze was piercing through the void and into that huge world, a world countless times larger than a small kiliocosm. That was the medium kiliocosm. Perhaps from today onwards, Lin Feng would really have to compete for the small kiliocosm origin with the true kiliocosm sovereigns. Moreover, there would be no way to get lucky or compromises to be made. If he wanted to become a true kiliocosm sovereign, this was the only way. Lin Feng stood quietly in the void. The origin of destruction had already disappeared, leaving only Lin Feng's figure. He saw the ecstasy on Supremacy Epic's face, but he did not pay much attention to it. This was because currently, Lin Feng was at his strongest, but at the same time he was also in the most danger. Come on, 3-star supremacies. Lin Feng shook his head. He already learned the secret of the kiliocosm sovereign now, and he did not care about the so-called 3-star at all. To ordinary controllers, 3-star might still be a very different realm. However, to Lin Feng it was nothing. Boom! In the next moment, Lin Feng's internal kiliocosm domain erupted completely. The wind of destruction swept through everything, destroying all of Lin Feng's internal kiliocosm domain and world origin. Only the chaotic lotus and the chaotic world protected by the chaotic lotus were still standing tall in the internal kiliocosm domain. As the destructive storm began, it meant that Lin Feng's path of evolution had also begun. At this moment, Lin Feng was not a 3-star entity, but he was stronger than a 3-star entity. Or rather, a demi-kiliocosm sovereign was just the right term. Swoosh! Supremacy Epic flew to Lin Feng's side immediately. He stared intently at Lin Feng and sized up Lin Feng all over, as if he wanted to see through Lin Feng. However, no matter how he looked, he could not seem to see through Lin Feng. He even saw a familiar aura on Lin Feng, vaguely similar to the aura of the epical cataclysm. It was filled with destruction, as if Lin Feng would be completely destroyed at any moment. Lin Feng, the aura on your body is very unique. You drew down the origin of destruction just now. Have you metamorphosed into a 3-star supremacy? Supremacy Epic had seen many 3-star supremacies, but none of them had Lin Feng's unique aura. It didn't seem very likely that Lin Feng was not a 3-star supremacy. At the very least, Supremacy Epic could not tell how many worlds there were in Lin Feng's body now. There seemed to be far more than 7 quadrillion worlds, but there also seemed to be far from 7 quadrillion worlds, or even not a single world. It was very strange. A 3-star supremacy? I guess so. Lin Feng smiled. Supremacy Epic was a little confused, not knowing what this I guess so meant. However, it was not Lin Feng's intention to brush him off. This was because Lin Feng's current situation had indeed exceeded the scope of ordinary cultivators. In my current state, I'm actually not a 3-star supremacy, but I'm better than a 3-star supremacy. If an ordinary controller wants to become a 3-star supremacy, they need to obtain the approval of the small kiliocosm to unleash the power of half a kiliocosm. There's another way, and that is to attain the principle by force. Once one's power is sufficiently strong, they will naturally possess the power of half a kiliocosm, and there's no need to obtain the approval of the small kiliocosm. Right now, I can barely be considered to have attained the principle by force, but I haven't succeeded. This is because I've already begun to evolve the small kiliocosm. The worlds and kiliocosm domains in my body have all been destroyed, leaving only destruction. Moreover, the epical cataclysm is slowly brewing. Although my worlds and kiliocosm domains have all been destroyed, the epical cataclysm also contains great power. As long as my internal kiliocosm domain hasn't completely collapsed, I almost have the power of the epical cataclysm in my body. Ordinary 3-star supremacies, even peak 3-star supremacies, are far from my match. Therefore, while I'm at my strongest now, I'm also at my weakest. At my strongest, I can ignore all entities below the realm of kiliocosm sovereigns. At my weakest, I might also die from the epical cataclysm tomorrow. Lin Feng did not conceal anything, and told Supremacy Epic everything about his current situation in detail. Although he had just met Supremacy Epic, Lin Feng already trusted him completely. Someone like Supremacy Epic was naturally trustworthy. Moreover, so what if he told him about evolving a small kiliocosm? Supremacy Epic was not a true controller who transformed into a universe. There was no way for him to evolve a small kiliocosm at all. If evolution was forced, death was the certain outcome. I see. It's much better than I imagined. You actually have a chance of becoming a true kiliocosm sovereign. Moreover, from the looks of it, the probability is at least 50%. At this thought, even Supremacy Epic could not help but feel excited. He was going to personally witness the birth of a true kiliocosm sovereign. From what he understood, forget about a small kiliocosm, even 100, 1,000, or even 10,000 small kiliocosms might not be able to give rise to a true kiliocosm sovereign. And now, he was about to witness the birth of a kiliocosm sovereign with his own eyes. How could he not be excited? Even though Supremacy Epic had been used to seeing great events since the first epic, and had even survived desperate situations several times, he had never been as excited as he was now. A kiliocosm sovereign. A true kiliocosm sovereign. Even though Lin Feng was not a kiliocosm sovereign now, according to Lin Feng's explanation, the current Lin Feng could almost be considered a demi-kiliocosm sovereign. He was almost invincible below the level of a kiliocosm sovereign. Seeing the Supremacy Epic's overjoyed expression, Lin Feng shook his head and heaved a long sigh. 50%? There isn't a 50% chance at all. Right now, the epical cataclysm of the small kiliocosm has yet to erupt, and there's no knowing when it will erupt. Until the epical cataclysm erupts in the small kiliocosm, it's almost impossible to obtain the small kiliocosm origin. Even a kiliocosm sovereign can't obtain the small kiliocosm origin before the epical cataclysm erupts, let alone me. The epical cataclysm of the small kiliocosm has not erupted, but the epical cataclysm in my internal kiliocosm domain has already begun to brew, can erupt at any time. Perhaps tomorrow, perhaps the day after, or perhaps in 10 or 100 years. There is no way to predict it. Lin Feng shook his head. Although from the looks of it, his situation was not very good, and was even rather grim, he had no regrets, nor was he dejected. If one could attain enlightenment, they would die content the next moment. Lin Feng had already understood the mysteries of the Kiliacosm sovereigns and the true meaning of cultivation. It could be said that he had already attained enlightenment. He had already experienced this great mental satisfaction. Hence, even if the epical cataclysm erupted immediately and reduced him to ashes, he would not feel any regret. If there isn't a 50% chance, then Supremacy Epic was a little worried, but he also knew that in such matters, even if he had a spatial supreme treasure, even if he was a great entity born in the first epoch, he could not help Lin Feng. Lin Feng could only rely on himself for matters of cultivation. No matter when my epical cataclysm erupts, before I'm reduced to ashes by the epical cataclysm, it's time for me to clean up this small Kiliacosm that gave birth to and raised me. Lin Feng placed his hands behind his back, but a trace of chilling killing intent flashed across his eyes. Facing the small Kiliacosms that collided, the descenders and so on, everything was in chaos now. Even Supremacy Epic or an ordinary 3-star Supremacy probably could not turn the tide. If Lin Feng just cultivated step by step, accumulated his internal worlds, and increased his combat power of worlds, even if his strength increased by tenfold and he had the combat power of quadrillions of worlds, he probably would not be able to stabilize the current situation, and could not sweep through everything. After all, when the 3 small Kiliacosms collided, how could the Kiliacosm sovereigns of the medium Kiliacosm not send down 3-star supremacies? Some of the 3-star supremacies had accumulated extremely powerful strength over time, and were peak combatants with the power of half a Kiliacosm. How could an ordinary 3-star supremacy contend against them? But the current Lin Feng could. Lin Feng did not prepare enough small Kiliacosm origin to allow his internal Kiliacosm domain to be supported by the small Kiliacosm origin. Preparation to avoid accidents was of the utmost importance. It could almost be considered a failed breakthrough. However, even if he failed, he still had the power to sweep through everything now. This was because he was a demi-Kiliacosm sovereign. He had already become a Kiliacosm sovereign in terms of realm, and was a demi-Kiliacosm sovereign whose body was about to brew the epical cataclysm. He would sweep through everything. No one and no power could stop him. That's right. All these years we haven't gone back to take a look. Dark domain supremacy. Let's go back to the Epic Alliance to take a look. Hence, Lin Feng and Supremacy Epic flew into the Supreme Spatial Pagoda and quickly entered the Supreme Spatial Passage, warping towards the Epic Alliance headquarters. Boom! In the quiet void, a huge claw descended from the sky. It was a huge monster with wings on its back, appearing like a tiger or leopard. Long fangs even protruded from its mouth. The giant beast destroyed a Kiliacosm domain with a single claw, as if it was very insignificant. Continue sweeping. This small Kiliacosm should belong to His Majesty. This giant beast was even larger than a Kiliacosm domain. It stretched across the void, and there were countless beasts under its command. Densely packed, all of them emitted a ferocious aura. Heh! These monsters are really savage. A Kiliacosm domain was destroyed just like that. These monsters are all subordinates of Supremacy Ghoul, and come from the Ghoul Kiliacosm. This Supremacy Ghoul is a peak 3-star entity with a notorious reputation. He once defeated a few 3-star supremacies sent by His Majesty the Kiliacosm Sovereign in succession. In addition, signs show that the epical cataclysm in the Ghoul Kiliacosm is still far away. Hence, they simply allowed that Supremacy Ghoul to monopolize the small Kiliacosm. This time, when the 3 small Kiliacosms collided, one of them was the Ghoul Kiliacosm. Looks like this Supremacy Ghoul is quite ambitious. This Kiliacosm domain originally belonged to those local factions, but when resisting the army from the Ghoul Kiliacosm, it naturally did not end well for them. Now, this small Kiliacosm is already meat on the chopping board, and completely at the mercy of others. Though, these ghouls are quite polite to us descenders. They didn't attack us. How would they dare to attack us? Where hasn't the medium Kiliacosm sent down quadrillion-level supremacies this time? In fact, there are even 3-star supremacies. Right now, we're just competing for resources with each other before the epical cataclysm arrives. Once the epical cataclysm arrives, more 3-star supremacies will definitely descend into this small Kiliacosm. How can Supremacy Ghoul dare to offend so many of us Descenders alone? On the other hand, I heard that the fiendish dark domain supremacy of the Epic Alliance had disappeared. He must be hiding. The dark domain supremacy is only a 100 trillion level supremacy at most. So what if he's a 100 trillion level supremacy? If he encountered the ghoul, or any of the other 3-star supremacies that descended, he'd be dead for certain. I heard that the first thing many 3-star supremacies who descended did was search for the dark domain supremacy, Lin Feng. Unfortunately, they found nothing. There's no knowing where he's hiding. These monsters could actually understand the discussions of those descenders. Normally, these monsters would probably attack directly and tear these people into pieces. However, under such circumstances, they did not dare to, because those people were descenders. Even Supremacy Ghoul, who was used to being domineering in the Ghoul Kiliacosm, did not dare to act rashly when facing the descenders. Now that these 3 small Kiliacosms were colliding, the situation was bizarre. All kinds of factions were involved, and Supremacy Ghoul did not dare to act too overboard. He could only behave properly, seize the initiative, and quickly reap the resources of this small Kiliacosm. Boom! At this moment, a huge pillar of light appeared in the void, and a dissension passage vaguely appeared. The giant beast took a look and ordered, "Head to the next Kiliacosm domain." The ghoul army was no longer surprised by the dissension passages that appeared in this small Kiliacosm, but they did not dare to provoke them either. Hence, the army quickly rushed towards a Kiliacosm domain ahead. At the Skyhorn Alliance headquarters, as the 3 small Kiliacosms collided, some controllers from the medium Kiliacosm factions that Lin Feng had destroyed previously also descended one after another. The Skyhorn Alliance had sent down a powerful 3-star Supremacy Skymond. Still haven't found him? Supremacy Skymond was dressed in a blue robe, and his aura was calm. However, his angled brows added a hint of sharpness. As he sat in a chair, the supremacies below were trembling in fear, not daring to meet his gaze at all. After all, that was a great 3-star supremacy, one of the undisputed top experts in the entire small Kiliacosm in the present. Supremacy, we have already captured some core elders of the Epic Alliance. We used some methods to finally get those core elders to talk, but they also do not know where the dark domain supremacy has gone. On the other hand, there are speculations that it's very likely the dark domain supremacy has gone to find Supremacy Epic. A peak 2-star supremacy stood respectfully in front of Supremacy Skymond and reported cautiously. He went to find Supremacy Epic? That's possible. The situation in this small Kiliacosm is so complicated that even I can't completely control it, let alone a mere 2-star supremacy. However, so what if he found Supremacy Epic? I've also learned that this Supremacy Epic has a spatial supreme treasure. It's quite useful for survival and can allow them to survive a few epical cataclysms. But so what? He's not a match for any 3-star supremacy. Even if he thinks of some way to save Supremacy Epic, it's useless. Alright, go down and continue investigating. No matter what, if Lin Feng appears, I need to know immediately. Yes, Supremacy. I will definitely do my best to inquire about Lin Feng. The 2-star supremacy left respectfully. Supremacy Skymond's eyes narrowed slightly. Even now, he still remembered the order given to him by the great Kiliacosm sovereign before his dissension. He had to capture Lin Feng alive at all costs. This was his only mission after descending. The Kiliacosm sovereign of the Skyhorn Alliance did not care about even the small Kiliacosm origin in the epical cataclysm. He only wanted to capture Lin Feng alive. Once Lin Feng was captured alive, it would be a great merit for him, Skymond. In the future, when the Kiliacosm sovereign nurtured a Kiliacosm sovereign-level boundary stone, he might be able to obtain a reward. However, after Supremacy Skymond descended, things did not go smoothly for him. Lin Feng had disappeared without a trace. No one knew where Lin Feng had gone, or if he was dead or alive. Dark Domain Supremacy, you possess the rules of time, and you're a true controller who transformed into a universe. You won't die so easily, right? You must live. Only if you live can I complete His Majesty the Kiliakosm Sovereign's order. Supremacy Skymond looked at the void, and a cold smile gradually appeared on his lips. This time, there was no need to fight for the small Kiliakosm origin. He only had to capture a 2-star supremacy alive. This was perhaps the easiest mission he had ever undertaken after descending into so many small Kiliakosms. But where was Lin Feng? In a remote world, a large number of controllers were gathered. There was no lack of 2-star supremacies among them. Just a stomp of their feet could easily shatter this fragile world. In a spacious divine palace, Supremacy Divine Jade asked anxiously, "How is it? Any news on Elder Lin?" Supremacy Divine Jade, the informants of our epic alliance have been eliminated one by one. Now, those monsters from the Ghoul Kiliakosm are everywhere. Our sources of information are becoming fewer and fewer. However, if there's news of the Dark Domain supremacy, we'll definitely send it immediately. It's just that there's still no news of the Dark Domain supremacy. Still no news. Supremacy Divine Jade frowned. The current situation was so tense. The Epic Alliance had basically been destroyed, leaving only a few core elders like them struggling at death's door. Supremacy Divine Jade, forgive me for being blunt, but so what if the Dark Domain supremacy returns? Hearing this, Supremacy Divine Jade's entire body shook. That's right. So what if Lin Feng returned? The current small Kiliakosm was no longer the same as before. Forget about Lin Feng, so what if both Lin Feng and Supremacy Epic returned? Lin Feng and Supremacy Epic would probably have to hide everywhere and struggle at death's door just like them. Hope. We have to have hope, right? And the Dark Domain supremacy is our hope. Supremacy Divine Jade took a deep breath, and his gaze became determined again. Suddenly, a controller flew in from outside. Supremacy Round Heart? What made you so flustered? The one who suddenly flew over was Supremacy Round Heart. Supremacy Divine Jade naturally knew about the relationship between Supremacy Round Heart and Lin Feng. Hence, after Lin Feng left, he had always treated Supremacy Round Heart as his trusted aide, or even his right-hand man. After the situation changed drastically, even the core elders fell one after another. However, Supremacy Round Heart had always been alive and well, because he was under the protection of Supremacy Divine Jade. At this moment, Supremacy Round Heart was very anxious. He said in a low voice, "It's the Ghoul Army. They've already found our whereabouts and sent Supremacy Giant Bear and his Giant Bear Legion to surround and kill us." Giant Bear Legion? Supremacy Divine Jade's expression changed abruptly. Of course he knew what was going on. The destruction of the Epic Alliance was actually closely related to the Ghoul Kiliakosm. It was the supremacies of the Ghoul Kiliakosm who directly caused the destruction of the Epic Alliance headquarters and killed multiple core elders. The ruler of the Ghoul Kiliakosm, the legendary 3-star Supremacy Ghoul, had found out that the former alliance leader of the Epic Alliance, Supremacy Epic, possessed a supreme spatial treasure. Supremacy Ghoul was very tempted and insisted on interrogating the whereabouts of Supremacy Epic. However, how could ordinary members of the Epic Alliance know the whereabouts of Supremacy Epic? Even Supremacy Divine Jade did not know the whereabouts of Supremacy Epic. However, the army of the Ghoul Kiliakosm remained aggressive. If they got the chance, the army of the Ghoul Kiliakosm would kill all of the Epic Alliance. Under the lead of Supremacy Divine Jade, the remaining members of the Epic Alliance hid everywhere, and finally escaped to such a small world. Unexpectedly, they were still discovered. Inform everyone immediately to activate the backup plan and escape separately. Supremacy Divine Jade immediately gave the order. They had been hiding for so long that they were already experienced. They had prepared some backup plans in advance. Once they discovered any traces of the enemy, they would immediately scatter and escape. In the end, after they were safe, they would meet at the location in the backup plan. Supremacy Divine Jade flew out of the world immediately. At the same time, many controllers, all members of the Epic Alliance, quickly flew out of the world as well. Gore! However, suddenly, a terrifying roar spread throughout the entire region. Many controllers' bodies shook, and even their movements slowed. Even Supremacy Divine Jade was stunned. This is the roar of Supremacy Giant Bear. Supremacy Divine Jade's heart skipped a beat. The Ghoul Kiliacosm hunted down the members of the Epic Alliance everywhere. How could Supremacy Divine Jade not collect information on the Ghoul Kiliacosm? As far as he knew, the only ruler in the Ghoul Kiliacosm was Supremacy Ghoul. He was a powerful 3-star supremacy, and had even defeated some 3-star supremacies who were descenders. As a result, there was not a single descender in the Ghoul Kiliacosm at all now, and he monopolized the entire Ghoul Kiliacosm. His power became even stronger. Under the command of Supremacy Ghoul were multiple legions. These legions varied in size and strength. The weaker ones were led by just trillion-level supremacies. However, the stronger ones were led by invincible quadrillion-level supremacies. They were simply undefeatable. Wherever the legions passed, everything was reduced to ashes. The Giant Bear Legion was one of the strongest legions under the command of Supremacy Ghoul. The Legion commander, Supremacy Giant Bear, was an invincible quadrillion-level supremacy. How could such a supremacy allow them to escape so easily? As the roar of Supremacy Giant Bear sounded, the giant bear monsters transformed into streams of light that actually converged from all directions, surrounding them. Supremacy Divine Jade's heart sank. The other party had actually surrounded them without anyone knowing. The dense horde of giant bear monsters surrounded them from all directions, and they were still closing in on Supremacy Divine Jade and the others. Those controllers who tried to escape quickly before the encirclement closed were all torn to pieces by the Giant Bear Legion. Supremacy Divine Jade took a deep breath. He knew that the enemy must have made thorough arrangements long ago. Even if they were lucky enough to charge out, they probably would not be able to escape. All of you come back. Supremacy Divine Jade's voice sounded in the void. Then, one controller after another slowly approached Supremacy Divine Jade and gathered beside him. Among them were Supremacy Roundheart and the remaining 9 core elders. Originally, apart from Lin Feng, there were 21 core elders. However, as the situation in the small Kiliacosm changed drastically, only 10 core elders were left now. The power of the Epic Alliance shrank further and further. From a huge faction that monopolized half a small Kiliacosm, it was now hiding everywhere and struggling at death's door. All of this had only taken decades. Supremacy Roundheart, the 9 core elders, and even the other controllers were all very quiet. The atmosphere was very silent. Those who could survive until now knew their situation very well. Without a doubt, they were already at the end of their rope. They were even about to enter the abyss of death step by step. But there was nothing they could do. Boom! An incomparably huge beast appeared in the void, its entire body emitting a terrifying aura without restraint. Just its aura suppressed Supremacy Divine Jade to the point of suffocation. A quadrillion-level supremacy. This was a true quadrillion-level supremacy. Even Supremacy Epic back then was only at this realm. Before, while the Dark Domain Supremacy Lin Feng appeared ferocious and invincible, he had not reached the level of a quadrillion-level supremacy. Faced with such a terrifying entity, what chance did they have? Speak. Where exactly is your Supremacy Epic? Supremacy Giant Bear asked coldly. He was a dignified quadrillion-level supremacy, yet he had specially come to hunt down a mere 10 trillion-level supremacy, who was not even a 100 trillion-level supremacy. It was really a little overkill. However, this was an order from the king, and Supremacy Giant Bear could only obey it. Right now, Supremacy Giant Bear only wanted to find Supremacy Epic as soon as possible, complete the mission, and conquer this small Kiliacosm. Hence, Supremacy Giant Bear did not have much patience. Supremacy Divine Jade shook his head and said, Supremacy Epic sacrificed himself to suppress the Celestial Devil Ancestor. No one knows where Supremacy Epic is. Even if you kill all of us, you won't be able to find the answer you seek. You can't find him? Since you can't find him, what's the point of keeping you? You pitiful, cowardly, and insignificant beings. You occupy such a wonderful small Kiliacosm in vain, yet did not even give rise to a quadrillion-level supremacy. You're really trash. Our ghoul Kiliakosm doesn't need trash either. So all of you must die, Supremacy Giant Bear roared. At the same time, his enormous bear paw slammed down, enveloping all the members of the Epic Alliance within 1 billion miles. Even Supremacy Divine Jade had no hope of facing this palm strike. It's over, Dark Domain Supremacy. Perhaps I can't wait for your return anymore. Supremacy Divine Jade closed his eyes. At this moment, he no longer held any hope. Buzz. Suddenly, circles of spatial ripples spread through the void. At the same time, a pitch-black supreme spatial passage suddenly appeared. A faint golden light suddenly flew out of the supreme spatial passage. Supremacy Giant Bear slammed his palm down. But a pagoda that was overflowing with golden light and filled with auspicious aura suddenly appeared in front of Supremacy Divine Jade. The huge pagoda stretched across the void, allowing Supremacy Giant Bear's palm to strike the pagoda. Boom! How powerful was the palm strike of Supremacy Giant Bear? He was a quadrillion-level supremacy. Even if he did not use his full strength, it would be difficult for even a 100 trillion-level supremacy to resist it. However, this pagoda flowing with auspicious aura stretched across the void resisted a strike from Supremacy Giant Bear head-on without moving at all, as if it was not shaken at all. This could not help but surprise Supremacy Giant Bear and even all the members of the Giant Bear Legion. However, compared to the surprise of the Giant Bear Legion, when the members of the Epic Alliance looked at the pagoda in the void, they all grew excited. As members of the Epic Alliance, no one was more familiar with this pagoda in the void than them. The Supreme Spatial Pagoda. It's the Supreme Spatial Pagoda. Could the Alliance leader have returned? It's the Alliance leader. The Alliance leader must have returned. Only the Alliance leader can control the Supreme Spatial Pagoda. Didn't the Alliance leader sacrifice himself to suppress the Celestial Devil Ancestor? Or could it be that the Celestial Devil Ancestor broke free from his control, killed Alliance leader, and seized the Supreme Spatial Pagoda? No, Alliance leader can't possibly be killed by the Celestial Devil Ancestor. It must be the Alliance leader. Seeing this pagoda, the people of the Epic Alliance recognized at a glance that it was the Supreme Spatial Pagoda, once the headquarters of the Epic Alliance. The only one who controlled it was the Supreme Alliance leader, Supremacy Epic. However, many people also knew that Supremacy Epic had sacrificed himself to suppress the Celestial Devil Ancestor. How could he possibly appear now? Hence, some were happy while others were worried. Supremacy Giant Bear, on the other hand, was very surprised. He stared intently at the Supreme Spatial Pagoda, as if in disbelief. Up until now, no treasure had been able to withstand a single punch from him. After all, the ghoul Kiliakosm was relatively barren. Of course there were treasures, but a treasure powerful enough to withstand a single strike from a quadrillion-level supremacy had yet to appear. Who dares to stop our Giant Bear Legion from carrying out our mission? Supremacy Giant Bear's booming voice echoed in the void. The Supreme Spatial Pagoda lay quietly in the void, as if there was no response. After an unknown period of time, a voice came from the Supreme Spatial Pagoda. "Weren't you looking for me?" Swoosh. The door of the Supreme Spatial Pagoda opened, and two figures flew out. The aura of one of the figures did not appear imposing, but he had a bearing that looked down upon all living beings. With a wave of his hand, the Supreme Spatial Pagoda flew back into his hand. Seeing this figure appear, all the members of the Epic Alliance erupted. Supremacy Epic. It's really Supremacy Epic. Alliance Leader. Alliance Leader has really returned? Incredible. Alliance Leader is back. Could he have already gotten rid of the Celestial Devil Ancestor? The figure beside Alliance Leader is so familiar. I think it's the Dark Domain Supremacy. That's right. It's the Dark Domain Supremacy. I heard a rumor that the Dark Domain Supremacy went to find Supremacy Epic. Did the two powerful supremacies join forces and kill the Celestial Devil Ancestor? That's possible. Even if they didn't kill him, they must have completely suppressed him. There's no need for Alliance Leader to spend much effort on it anymore. Haha, the Alliance Leader and the Dark Domain Supremacy have both returned. Our Epic Alliance can finally end our days of hiding. The members of the Epic Alliance were all overjoyed. They seemed to have become confident all of a sudden, feeling that they were safe. Be it the Dark Domain Supremacy Linfeng or Supremacy Epic, they were both the mainstays of the Epic Alliance. Now that the two mainstays had returned together, the members of the Epic Alliance naturally felt incomparably safe. However, they did not know how powerful a three-star entity was. If they did, they probably would not think that Supremacy Epic had dealt with the Celestial Devil Ancestor. However, most people did not know how powerful a three-star supremacy was. Only quadrillion-level supremacies like Supremacy Giant Bear, who followed a three-star supremacy, knew how terrifying a three-star supremacy was. Your Supremacy Epic? Supremacy Giant Bear was a little incredulous. He had heard that Supremacy Epic had sacrificed himself and used the Supreme Pagoda to suppress the Celestial Devil Ancestor, who was a three-star emperor. It was somewhat unbelievable that a two-star supremacy could suppress a three-star emperor, even by relying on a treasure. Now, he had actually returned suddenly, which was even more unbelievable. However, intuition told Supremacy Giant Bear that the person in front of him was Supremacy Epic. Supremacy Epic glanced at Supremacy Divine Jade and the others. Seeing that there were only 10 core elders left in the Epic Alliance, his expression gradually darkened. Cultivators of the Ghoul Kiliacosm, no matter how audacious you were in the past, from today onwards, go back to your small Kiliacosm. Otherwise, you will be killed without mercy, Supremacy Epic said unyieldingly, his tone revealing infinite dominance and confidence. Supremacy Giant Bear flew into a rage and shouted, "The ignorant are truly fearless. I'll capture you today and offer you to my king." The body of Supremacy Giant Bear began to expand. At the same time, the world power in his body swept out in a frenzy. At last, the dense horde of giant bears in the Giant Bear Legion behind Supremacy Giant Bear combined their power with Supremacy Giant Bear. Supreme Pagoda Suppress. Faced with the roar of the Giant Bear and the power of the entire Giant Bear Legion, Supremacy Epic only tossed out the pagoda in a casual move. The Supreme Pagoda spun and became infinitely tall, as if it could blot out everything. A terrifying aura filled the void. Boom! Supremacy Giant Bear struck the Supreme Spatial Pagoda with his palm. At this moment, the Supreme Spatial Pagoda actually began to shake violently, and it retreated slightly. Supremacy Epic's entire body shook as well. Even his internal Kiliacosm domain was shaking violently. Fortunately, he withstood the attack of Supremacy Giant Bear. Supremacy Giant Bear was in an even worse state. When he was struck by the Supreme Spatial Pagoda, the terrifying force directly killed tens of thousands of members of the Giant Bear Legion. Those members were all one-star supremacies or above. This caused the Giant Bear Legion to suffer heavy losses. Damn it, Giant Bear Legion! Reinforce me! Supremacy Giant Bear roared furiously, already flying into a rage. The tens of thousands of members of the Giant Bear Legion behind him also roared towards the sky. Then, their world power shook wildly, finally forming a special frequency that combined with the world power of Supremacy Giant Bear, and his strength instantly increased by several times. At this moment, Supremacy Giant Bear was a top-notch 2-star supremacy, infinitely close to a 3-star supremacy. Back then, relying on the Supreme Spatial Pagoda, Supremacy Epic was only at this level as well. For a moment, Supremacy Epic's expression was solemn. He was not afraid of the strength of Supremacy Giant Bear, but if they were to fight, they would probably have to be entangled. He had the Supreme Spatial Pagoda and was undefeatable. However, if the Giant Bear Legion was already so strong, what would happen when a few more legions arrive? Moreover, unless Supremacy Epic sacrificed himself like he did to suppress the Celestial Devil Ancestor, it was impossible for him to defeat the Giant Bear Legion in a short period of time. However, in that case, Supremacy Epic might be injured again. He was already injured after suppressing the Celestial Devil Ancestor. If he attacked with all his might now, it would only exacerbate his injuries. Alliance Leader, let me do it. Just as Supremacy Epic was about to attack with full power, a familiar voice suddenly sounded in his ear. Huh? Dark Domain Supremacy. I'm not afraid of this Supremacy Giant Bear. Supremacy Epic still wanted to attack personally. He was unwilling to expose Lin Feng now. However, Lin Feng was staring in a certain direction in the void. There seemed to be a deep meaning in his eyes as he said calmly, "No, Alliance Leader. Someone is already here. Since a distinguished guest is here, I naturally have to come forward to welcome him." Distinguished guest? At this moment, Supremacy Epic also followed Lin Feng's gaze and looked in a certain direction in the void. Apart from the mighty giant bear legion, there seemed to be no one else in the void. Even though Supremacy Epic controlled the Supreme Spatial Pagoda and could warp through the Supreme Spatial Passage, he did not discover anything. However, Supremacy Epic also knew Lin Feng very well. He knew that Lin Feng was not someone who made announcements without reason. Since he said so, there must be a reason. Hence, Supremacy Epic nodded and took a step back. Lin Feng walked slowly towards the Giant Bear Legion step by step, but his gaze was not on Supremacy Giant Bear at all. He even seemed to disregard Supremacy Giant Bear and the Giant Bear Legion. "Who are you?" Supremacy Giant Bear yelled, but Lin Feng paid no heed, as if he had not heard it. His gaze was fixed in a certain direction in the void. This could not help but infuriate Supremacy Giant Bear. He was a dignified peak 2-star supremacy with combat power of several quadrillion worlds, and even led one of the most elite legions in the Ghoul Kiliacosm, the Giant Bear Legion. When had he ever been ignored like this? Even in this small Kiliacosm, hadn't he fought the so-called invincible Supremacy Epic head-on, and come out evenly matched? A controller who appeared out of nowhere actually dared to treat him as if he was nothing. At this moment, Supremacy Giant Bear's killing intent burst forth, boiling violently like a volcanic eruption. Sensing Supremacy Giant Bear's killing intent, the surrounding members of the Epic Alliance all opened their mouths wide. Supremacy Giant Bear did not know who the white-robed man in front of him was, but they did, and they knew it very well. Dark Domain Supremacy? Why did he go to deal with Supremacy Giant Bear? The Dark Domain Supremacy is a powerful supremacy second only to Supremacy Epic, but Supremacy Giant Bear is a supremacy with quadrillions of worlds. With the enhancement of the Giant Bear Legion, his strength is not inferior to Supremacy Epic with the Supreme Spatial Pagoda at all. Isn't the Dark Domain Supremacy's action a little overconfident? I don't think it's that simple. Let's be patient. Since Supremacy Epic took the initiative to retreat, it means that he should have confidence in the Dark Domain Supremacy. Don't forget his identity as the Dark Domain Supremacy. He had transformed into a universe, and is the candidate of a true Kiliacosm sovereign. It's been decades since we last saw him. Who knows how much his strength has increased? The people of the Epic Alliance knew Lin Feng's true strength. Even if they did not know Lin Feng's current strength, according to Lin Feng's past performance, they would not be too surprised. However, to Supremacy Giant Bear, Lin Feng's disregard was simply the greatest humiliation to him. Giant Bear Legion, kill! At this moment, the killing intent of Supremacy Giant Bear boiled. He did not care if Lin Feng was a 100 trillion level supremacy or a quadrillion level supremacy, nor did he care what was special about Lin Feng. The killing intent in his entire body surged as he intended to unleash all his strength and blast the person in front of him into ashes. You still won't show yourself? Lin Feng looked in a certain direction in the void, but did not even look at Supremacy Giant Bear. Lin Feng did not even seem to take Supremacy Giant Bear's eruption in anger seriously. Forget it. I'll get rid of some insignificant people first. Lin Feng finally shifted his gaze to Supremacy Giant Bear, but that was all. Facing the strike from Supremacy Giant Bear, Lin Feng did not even make any unnecessary movements. He only extended a finger. He just tapped out with a finger gently. Boom! Supremacy Giant Bear's heart palpitated. Lin Feng had clearly only extended a finger, but in his eyes, it was like a huge pillar that could hold up the sky, occupying his full attention. Moreover, there seemed to be a terrifying and oppressive aura that made him feel as if he was about to suffocate. It had to be known that Supremacy Giant Bear was a top 2-star supremacy with between 2 to 3 quadrillion worlds. When enhanced by the Giant Bear Legion, his strength could even double, enough to become one of the peak 2-star supremacies. He was not inferior to even Supremacy Epic. In fact, if Supremacy Epic did not have the Supreme Spatial Pagoda, he would even be crushed by Supremacy Giant Bear. But now, Supremacy Giant Bear, who had already been enhanced by the Giant Bear Legion and was one of the peak 2-star supremacies, was panicking over a mere finger from Lin Feng. No, how is this possible? Supremacy Giant Bear could not believe his eyes. At the same time, his palm had already collided fiercely with Lin Feng's finger. Boom! Although a strange sound rang out, and there was some minuscule movement, there was no earth-shattering movement as expected. Lin Feng's finger was like the sharpest spear, easily tearing apart the attack of Supremacy Giant Bear. Crunch! Supremacy Giant Bear's palm was instantly reduced to dust, apparently crushed by a powerful force. Even everyone in the Giant Bear Legion felt as if they had suffered a heavy blow. It felt like a huge pillar had ruthlessly smashed down and crushed them. At this moment, Supremacy Giant Bear felt great terror. He knew that he was not Lin Feng's match. In fact, faced with this mere finger, Supremacy Giant Bear even felt the threat of death. Lin Feng's finger seemed to be very slow, but in reality, it had already arrived in front of Supremacy Giant Bear in the blink of an eye. Supremacy Giant Bear had no doubt that once this finger touched him, he would die. Moreover, there would be no accident or exception at all. Even the entire Giant Bear Legion would die. There was great terror in death. Supremacy Giant Bear could not help but roar. He seemed to be frantically trying to retreat. However, the terrifying pressure seemed to have suppressed him tightly, and he could not even move. No! A trace of despair appeared on Supremacy Giant Bear's face. He had never expected to die inexplicably at the hands of an unfamiliar controller. Stop! At the critical moment, a loud yell suddenly came from the void. Boom! At the same time, the void was torn apart, and an extremely powerful aura erupted with a bang. Under this aura, be it 1-star supremacies, 2-star supremacies, or even Supremacy Epic, all of them wore aghast expressions. They hurriedly used the Supreme Spatial Pagoda to shield their bodies. Otherwise, just this aura alone would be enough to suppress Supremacy Epic. A 3-star supremacy. It must be a 3-star supremacy. Supremacy Epic's expression was aghast. He had experienced so many epical cataclysms. How could he not recognize the aura of a 3-star supremacy? The aura that suddenly erupted in front of them was undoubtedly the aura of a 3-star supremacy. Oh? You're finally willing to show yourself. Lin Feng's gaze also landed on this unfamiliar controller who had suddenly unleashed his aura. I told you to stop. The unfamiliar controller enunciated each word clearly, like an emperor in the mortal world, filled with infinite authority. He was still very far from Lin Feng, but when he extended his palm, it was as if the void went black all of a sudden. Everything within billions of miles was enveloped by this palm. The terrifying power made all the 1-star and 2-star supremacies feel as if they had encountered their natural predator. It was a suppression from the depths of their souls, a suppression produced by an unimaginable disparity in strength. When Supremacy Giant Bear saw this unfamiliar controller, he could not help but reveal a trace of ecstasy. He shouted, "Your Majesty, save me!" The huge palm had already enveloped down. Moreover, it immediately grabbed Supremacy Giant Bear and even the Giant Bear Legion, ready to return at once. However, Lin Feng shook his head, and a sharp glint flashed across his eyes. You can't stop me from killing who I want. His tone was cold and filled with killing intent. In the next moment, the finger Lin Feng extended suddenly sped up. In the blink of an eye, it was in front of Supremacy Giant Bear and the palm of the unfamiliar controller. Hence, the finger and the palm collided forcefully. Ignorant! The unfamiliar controller sneered. He was not an ordinary supremacy, but a 3-star supremacy. He had even defeated other 3-star supremacies and dominated the Ghoul Kiliacosm. He was the supreme ruler Supremacy Ghoul. He could not see Lin Feng's realm, but he roughly knew that Lin Feng probably had the strength of a 3-star. However, even a 3-star supremacy would not dare to be so careless as to receive a palm strike from him. This palm strike appeared very ordinary, but in reality he had already used almost 80% of his strength. Even a lion would use its full strength when hunting a rabbit. Supremacy Ghoul naturally understood the essence of it. Supremacy Ghoul was known for his strength to begin with, and he had used more than 80% of his strength in this palm strike. It was almost the maximum amount of power he could unleash on the spur of the moment. He was confident that with just one palm strike, he would definitely make Lin Feng suffer a considerable loss. However, Lin Feng behaved as if he really had not noticed Supremacy Ghoul's intent. He still only pointed out with a finger. However, just as this finger was about to collide with Supremacy Ghoul's palm, a destructive power suddenly erupted from Lin Feng's body. Boom! Destruction. That was the power of destruction. At this moment, Lin Feng mobilized all the power in his body. What power was there in Lin Feng's body? He no longer had worlds, kiliocosm domains. He had no world power. Even his kiliocosm domain rules were not operating smoothly. At this moment, Lin Feng was at his weakest, but he was also at his strongest. The reason he was at his strongest was that while he had lost his worlds and some kiliocosm domain rules, he possessed an even more terrifying power. That was the power of destruction. This was a terrifying destructive power that could destroy worlds, kiliocosm domains, and even small kiliocosms. Lin Feng only mobilized the destructive power in his body slightly, and immediately, the void in billions of miles seemed to be enveloped in a shadow of destruction. Boom! Finally, Lin Feng's finger collided fiercely with Supremacy Ghoul's palm. This was a true and a simple collision, a head-on clash between great three-star supremacies. Even Supremacy Epic stayed far away to avoid being implicated. Fortunately, the Supreme Spatial Pagoda protected the people of the Epic Alliance. Otherwise, just some slight aftershock of the clash between two three-star supremacies could easily destroy everything around them, even two-star supremacies. They could not even withstand the aftershock. This isn't world power. What kind of power is this? The moment Lin Feng's finger collided with Supremacy Ghoul's palm, the smile on Supremacy Ghoul's face suddenly froze. It was as if he had discovered something incredible. He sensed a destructive power that even he found difficult to resist, suddenly erupting from Lin Feng's finger. It was like an avalanche or the collapse of the cosmos. Even Supremacy Ghoul found it difficult to hold out. Crack. Hence, Supremacy Ghoul's palm cracked like glass and shattered instantly. Lin Feng's finger, on the other hand, did not seem to be affected at all. Its speed was only slightly impeded, but it still pointed towards Supremacy Giant Bear. The smile on Supremacy Giant Bear's face froze as well. He seemed disbelieving. The king, who was like an omnipotent god, in his heart had actually failed to protect him, leaving him to face Lin Feng's finger directly. "No, your majesty. Save me, save me." As Lin Feng pointed at Supremacy Giant Bear, time seemed to have frozen all of a sudden. Everything around him stopped. Everyone's gaze was fixed on Lin Feng's finger and the massive body of Supremacy Giant Bear. Boom! The huge body of Supremacy Giant Bear seemed to be instantly shattered by a terrifying force. Even the Giant Bear Legion, one of the strongest legions in the Ghoul Kiliocosm, was instantly destroyed by this powerful force. Supremacy Giant Bear was dead, without even leaving a trace behind. The Giant Bear Legion was also destroyed and reduced to ashes. With a finger from Lin Feng, the Giant Bear Legion was destroyed. Supremacy Giant Bear had fallen. In fact, with a finger, he had even injured the Supreme King of the Ghoul Kiliocosm, Supremacy Ghoul. After doing all of this, Lin Feng retracted his hand and stood with his hands behind his back. It was as if everything just now was very ordinary. He wore a nonchalant look. Supremacy Ghoul's entire being was filled with a cold, almost materialized killing intent. "How dare you?" Supremacy Ghoul gritted his teeth as he glared at Lin Feng. Right in front of him, the dignified Supremacy Ghoul, the esteemed king of the Ghoul Kiliocosm, Lin Feng had killed Supremacy Giant Bear with a single tap of the finger. This was a public slap in the face, embarrassing a dignified three-star supremacy like him in public. How many years had passed since Supremacy Ghoul ever encountered anything that embarrassed him so much? Even back when the Ghoul Kiliacosm was still in chaos, and was dominated by descenders from the medium Kiliacosm, he had never been so embarrassed. But now, he had been forcefully slapped in the face by an unfamiliar controller from a small Kiliacosm. For a moment, killing intent boiled in Supremacy Ghoul's heart. Lin Feng looked at Supremacy Ghoul indifferently. He could tell that Supremacy Ghoul was very, very strong. The only 3-star experts Lin Feng had seen so far were the Celestial Devil Ancestor and Supremacy Ghoul. If the Celestial Devil Ancestor was used as the standard of measurement, Lin Feng was very certain that if the Celestial Devil Ancestor encountered Supremacy Ghoul, he would probably be beaten to death. The difference between them was unimaginable. Supremacy Ghoul's strength made him one of the top entities even among the 3-star supremacies who had descended from the medium Kiliacosm. Otherwise, how could the medium Kiliacosm factions allow Supremacy Ghoul to monopolize the Ghoul Kiliacosm? However, even such a powerful 3-star supremacy had been slapped in the face by Lin Feng in public. It was enough to show that Lin Feng had at least the strength of a 3-star supremacy. This scene shocked the people of the Epic Alliance, even Supremacy Epic. Although Supremacy Epic had his guesses, and Lin Feng had even explained it in detail to him, hearing Lin Feng's explanation was one thing. Seeing Lin Feng repel a 3-star supremacy with his own eyes was another. Even Supremacy Epic, who knew Lin Feng's strength in advance, was so shocked, let alone the other members of the Epic Alliance. They were even more dumbfounded, and could not quite believe the scene before them. Supremacy Giant Bear is dead? Even the Giant Bear Legion was annihilated and reduced to ashes, with just a finger from the Dark Domain Supremacy. Supremacy Giant Bear is nothing. Haven't you realized the identity of that mysterious supremacy? He's the king of the Ghoul Kiliacosm, the legendary 3-star supremacy. 3-star supremacy. That's right, that must be the ruler of the Ghoul Kiliacosm, Supremacy Ghoul. The Dark Domain Supremacy could actually repel Supremacy Ghoul with a finger. It's unbelievable. Does this mean that the Dark Domain Supremacy is also a 3-star supremacy? Heavens! A 3-star supremacy has finally been born in our Epic Alliance. This is hope. This is our only hope. Everyone stared fervently at Lin Feng's figure. A 3-star supremacy. Lin Feng had become a 3-star supremacy. This was simply more explosive and shocking than any news. Anyone who saw it with their own eyes could not calm down for a long time. However, there were still some rational people who kept their cool. Supremacy Ghoul was not an ordinary 3-star supremacy. According to those controllers in the Ghoul Kiliacosm, Supremacy Ghoul had once defeated many 3-star supremacies among the descenders from the medium Kiliacosm alone. That was how he could maintain the hegemony in the Ghoul Kiliacosm. Even the medium Kiliacosm no longer sent descenders to the Ghoul Kiliacosm. The strength of Supremacy Ghoul was evident. In the void, Lin Feng acted as if he was unaware of some of the great feats of Supremacy Ghoul, as if he did not know how terrifying this top-notch 3-star supremacy was. He only glanced indifferently at Supremacy Ghoul, then said coldly in an unquestionable tone, "Retreat to the Ghoul Kiliacosm and you may live."